Sexual violence is a global issue in today's world. Rape and other acts of sexual assault occur in every part of the world, and although they are particularly degrading and harmful to the victim, they're incredibly common. The frequency of sexual assault crimes is propelled by the normalization of rape in society, a phenomenon part of the more broad concept of rape culture. The term rape culture was coined in the 1970s by second-wave feminists who focused on the rape crisis as one of the central issues of the world. As Gabrielle Lucero argues, rape culture is the idea that institutions, media, and popular culture normalize and excuse violence by encouraging male aggression, using victim blaming, and tasking victims with the burden of rape prevention. Rape culture teaches men to be violent and aggressive, always searching for sex, while it teaches women to be innocent and sexually pure. Because of this, rape is largely related to acts of dominance and power rather than sexual pleasure. Mexico, similar to the rest of today's world, faces a high incidence of rape cases. A report produced by the government documented the statistics of sexual assault between 2010 and 2015. There were 3 million cases, including 94% that go not unreported. In 2014, there were approximately 600,000 cases and 1,644 each day. The report also noted that 59.8% of victims already knew their rapists prior to the crime, contrary to the common belief that all rape is stranger rape. That number does account for the majority of cases, but is also much smaller than the 80% of victims in the United States who already knew their perpetrators. Rape culture is present everywhere in the world and has permeated so deeply into societies that cases of sexual assault are extremely common. Mexico's society, like many others, tends to ignore the presence of rape and the existence of rapists, which in turn perpetuates rape culture. This denial of rape as a whole means that only 1% of Mexico's rapists ever face jail time, and most cases go unreported altogether. This allows rapists to walk amongst their victims and has extremely harmful effects on the victims. Victims who do not report do not receive mental support in the recovery process. If rape continues to be ignored in Mexico and rape culture continues to influence society, the cycle will never end and victims will continue to be silenced.
A study reported that during their daily commute, 9 out of 10 women in Mexico feel unsafe on public transportation. Buses, trains, and other forms of public transportation in Mexico are known to be unsafe spaces. A campaign last year meant to combat this ignited major criticism from activists when police officers handed out whistles for women to use to notify others when they were being assaulted. This was found extremely controversial because it placed more of a burden on the victims than on the perpetrators. A similar campaign occurred a month earlier when 1,200 police officers dressed in pink vests and flooded the Mexican subway system to demonstrate that they stood with the victims. This act was also met with criticism. A writer for feminist issues said that their solution is either going to segregate us or make us responsible for our own safety. The mass transit system in the capital city transports nearly 4 million people each day, and compared to 16 cities around the world, Mexico City has the biggest issue of sexual harassment. It was reported that 64% of Mexican respondents had reported being victimized. Mexican activists began trending on Twitter with the hashtag #MiPrimerAcoso, or My First Harassment. This campaign inspired tens of thousands of women who had been victimized, many of them on public transportation, to share their stories on social media sites.
To combat the sexual harassment and assault that wreaks havoc on Mexico's transportation services, the Mexico City mass transit system has installed a display on the metro system featuring seats with male genitalia. This exhibit is directed towards men in order to replicate the experiences that women face in Mexico. A sign on the floor reads, "It's annoying to sit here, but doesn't compare to the sexual violence women suffer on their daily trips."
This is a really common problem, and it is completely tolerated by our society. If we talked about it and responded to it, and authorities intervened every time it happened, we would generate a culture of zero tolerance.
Women also began protesting by wearing black burqas when boarding the Mexico City subway system, not because they were Muslim, but because they wanted to make the point that their bodies were not objects to be touched or stared at.
So why is rape culture so common in Mexico? It's difficult to answer this question because it's impossible to come to conclusions without forming generalizations. However, there are certain cultural customs that could contribute to the rape culture that has become such an issue in Mexico. This cross-cultural difference in race and religion can be explained through a lens of intersectionality. From a religious perspective, a lot of cultural norms, like the importance of family, can be connected to the fact that 85% of Mexicans are Catholic. The Catholic faith tends to encourage traditional lifestyles, including traditional gender norms and a patriarchal view on family life. These family values lead to men being more inclined to harass a woman if he believes he's entitled to do so, and women may be less inclined to report sexual harassment if they conform to the ideologies of traditional gender roles, suggesting that they should be passive or second to a man. It is necessary to focus on the way that the Mexican government has responded to the sexual violence within public transportation. Their responses have normalized the very sexual harassment they are trying to put an end to. This could be a result of the cultural views of gender roles and the normalization of male-dominant power, among other factors. The government took its first big step in responding to the violence occurring in the transportation system by creating women-only subway cars and buses during rush hour in Mexico City. This law is counterintuitive and makes no effort to put an end to sexual violence itself or the ideologies that normalize it. The government issued a second response by creating its whistle program. As mentioned earlier, this program also met harsh criticism from activists. The campaign failed to address the issue at hand. Distributing whistles does not stop perpetrators from sexually assaulting. Both of these attempts by the Mexican government to address Mexico's sexual assault crisis in the public transportation system place the responsibility of sexual assault on the victim rather than blaming the criminal. Additionally, they failed to address the root of the crisis. The government has attempted to address this issue. Their attempts have been infrequent and unsuccessful. In order to really combat the crisis, change will also have to come from feminist activism groups spreading awareness on the subject and implementing campaigns in addition to the government's quick fixes to these issues. Recently, the government has made more efforts to spread awareness. The bus seat that was mentioned earlier was partially funded by the government. This effort was more effective than the past ones, and hopefully the Mexican government can be more present in putting an end to the sexual assault crisis. Although the bus seat idea was a good way to spread awareness, it took years for the government to actually implement anything. It can be argued that the government only put funds and effort into this campaign as a result of the female activism that has been occurring recently, rather than as a result of the actual sexual assault that has been occurring for years, as a global crisis in our modern world. In Mexico, the story is no different. Victims are constantly being groped, harassed, objectified, and raped by perpetrators of these horrible crimes. It is very common to see these crimes take place within the public transportation system, but it happens everywhere. The Mexican government has responded to this issue with less severity than they should, aiming to temporarily fix the problems rather than permanently attacking the source of why they are occurring to begin with. Many feminist activism groups in Mexico have formed and are attempting to inform others about these issues as a way to pick up some of the slack of the government. While any social change is a slow process on such a large level, the work is being done, has already begun to implement this change, and hopefully will continue to do so until there is no longer any need.